The morning sun painted the fields of Millbrook Valley in shades of gold and amber. Thomas Miller stood at the edge of his property, watching the light dance across the cornstalks that swayed gently in the warm breeze. His weathered hands gripped the wooden fence post as he surveyed the land that had been in his family for 3 generations. At 35, Thomas had seen his share of hardship. The farm struggled each year, barely producing enough to cover the mortgage payments and basic expenses. His clothes were patched and faded, his boots worn thin from countless hours in the fields. Yet there was something peaceful about this life, something that connected him to the earth and to his father's memory. The road that ran along the edge of his property was usually quiet, carrying only the occasional pickup truck or school bus. But today, something felt different. The air hummed with an unusual energy, as if the universe was preparing for a moment that would change everything. Thomas wiped the sweat from his brow and headed toward the old red barn where his tools waited. The morning chores wouldn't complete themselves, and there was always something that needed fixing, planting, or harvesting. As he walked, he noticed how the shadows fell differently today, how the birds seemed to sing with more purpose. Meanwhile, 15 miles away in the city, Isabella Richardson sat in the back of her silver SUV, her fingers dancing across the screen of her tablet. As the CEO of Richardson Industries, she was accustomed to constant motion, endless meetings, and decisions that affected thousands of employees. Her life moved at breakneck speed, filled with boardrooms and conference calls, luxury hotels, and first-class flights. Today's schedule was particularly demanding. 3 back-to-back meetings in different parts of the state, followed by a charity gala in the evening. Her assistant had warned her about the tight timeline, but Isabella thrived on challenge. She had built her father's small manufacturing company into a multi-million-dollar empire through sheer determination and an unwavering focus on success. Her driver, Marcus, navigated the winding country roads that served as a shortcut between appointments. Isabella barely glanced up from her work as they passed through the rolling hills and farmland. This world of open spaces and slow living seemed foreign to her, almost quaint in its simplicity. The GPS says we'll make good time on this route, Marcus called back to her. Isabella nodded absently, her attention consumed by quarterly reports and profit projections. She had learned long ago to maximize every moment, to squeeze productivity from even the smallest pockets of time. As they approached a gentle curve near Millbrook Valley, something went terribly wrong. Later, investigators would determine that a mechanical failure in the steering system caused the SUV to veer suddenly toward the shoulder. Marcus fought to regain control, but the vehicle's momentum carried it off the road and directly toward the wooden fence where Thomas had been standing. Just an hour earlier, Thomas heard the sound first, the screech of tires against asphalt, followed by the crash of metal against wood. He dropped his hammer and ran toward the commotion, his heart pounding with concern rather than fear. Years of farm life had taught him to respond quickly to emergencies, whether they involved injured animals or broken machinery. The SUV had come to rest against his fence, steam rising from the crumpled hood. Through the spider-webbed windshield, Thomas could see 2 figures inside, motionless and potentially hurt. Without hesitation, he approached the passenger side, where a woman in an expensive business suit sat dazed and bleeding from a small cut on her forehead. Ma'am, can you hear me? Thomas called out, his voice steady and reassuring. Isabella looked up, her vision blurry and her head spinning. The tablet that had seemed so important moments ago now lay shattered on the floor. She tried to speak but found her voice caught in her throat. Don't try to move too quickly, Thomas said gently. You might have a concussion. Let me help you out of there. He tested the door handle and found it jammed. The impact had twisted the frame just enough to trap the occupants inside. Thomas looked around quickly, assessing the situation. The engine was still running, and he could smell gasoline beginning to leak from somewhere beneath the vehicle. We need to get you out of here right now, he said, his calm demeanor masking the urgency he felt. Thomas ran to his tool shed and grabbed a crowbar, returning to the SUV within seconds. He wedged the metal bar against the door frame and applied steady pressure. Using techniques he had learned from years of coaxing stubborn farm equipment back to life. The door gave way with a sharp crack, and Thomas immediately reached in to help Isabella out of the vehicle. She was shaking now, whether from shock or fear, he couldn't tell. Her expensive clothes were torn, her perfectly styled hair disheveled. But she was alive and conscious. Thank you, she whispered as he helped her to solid ground. Thank you so much. Are you hurt anywhere else? Thomas asked, his eyes scanning her 4 signs of serious injury. Before she could answer, he was already moving toward the driver's side, where Marcus was beginning to stir. The extraction process took longer this time, as Marcus had sustained a leg injury that made movement difficult. But Thomas worked with the same methodical patience he applied to every task, never rushing but never wasting motion. By the time the ambulance arrived, Thomas had moved both victims to a safe distance from the SUV, and had used his basic first aid knowledge to clean Isabella's cut and stabilize Marcus's leg. He had also called the fire department as a precaution, though the gasoline leak had thankfully not ignited. As the paramedics took over, Isabella found herself watching this quiet farmer who had appeared from nowhere to save their lives. There was something about his unhurried competence, his genuine concern for strangers, that struck her as profoundly different from the world she inhabited. What's your name? She asked him, as the paramedics prepared her for transport to the hospital. Thomas. Miller, he replied simply. I hope you're going to be okay. Isabella Richardson, she said, extending her hand despite the paramedics' protests. I owe you my life. Thomas shook her hand gently, noting how soft it was compared to his own calloused palm. You don't owe me anything. I'm just glad I was here. The weeks that followed brought changes neither of them had anticipated. Isabella's injuries were minor, but the accident had shaken something loose inside her. For the first time in years, she found herself thinking about things other than business metrics and market share. She kept remembering the way Thomas had moved with such purposeful calm, how he had put their safety above everything else, without expecting anything in return. She began driving past his farm on her way to appointments, slowing down to catch glimpses of him working in the fields. There was something hypnotic about watching him tend to his crops, something that made her question whether the relentless pace of her life was really necessary. Finally, she worked up the courage to stop. She found Thomas repairing the same fence that her SUV had damaged, replacing the broken posts with new wood that gleamed pale and fresh in the afternoon sun. I wanted to thank you again, she said, stepping out of her car, and to pay for the damage to your fence. Thomas looked up from his work, a slight smile crossing his face. No need for payment. Insurance took care of everything. They talked for an hour that day, sitting on his porch and sharing stories about their vastly different lives. Isabella learned about the challenges of farming, the satisfaction of growing things with your own hands, the deep connection to land and seasons that had shaped Thomas's worldview. Thomas learned about the pressures of corporate leadership, the loneliness that could come with success, the way Isabella had sacrificed personal relationships to build her business empire. As the weeks turned to months, these conversations became a regular part of both their lives. Isabella would stop by after work, trading her business suits for simple clothes, helping Thomas with small tasks around the farm. She discovered muscles she didn't know she had, and a peace she had never experienced in boardrooms or corner offices. Thomas, meanwhile, found himself looking forward to her visits, with an anticipation that surprised him. Isabella brought stories of the wider world, perspectives that challenged his thinking, and a gentle laughter that seemed to brighten even the cloudiest days. The moment when everything clicked into place came on a warm evening in late summer. They were sitting on the porch, watching fireflies dance among the corn stalks, when Isabella realized she had been happier in these past few months than in all her years of professional success combined. I think I'm falling in love with this place, she said quietly, and with you. Thomas set down his glass of lemonade and turned to face her. I've been hoping you'd say something like that, he admitted. Because I fell in love with you the moment I saw you refuse to give up, even when everything seemed hopeless. Asterisk, they married the following spring, in a simple ceremony held right there on the farm. Isabella restructured her company to allow for remote work, splitting her time between the corporate world and the peaceful rhythms of farm life. She learned to drive a tractor and milk cows, while Thomas learned to navigate business meetings and charity events. Asterisk, their life together wasn't without challenges, but they had learned something valuable from that day when an out-of-control SUV brought them together. Sometimes the most important moments come disguised as disasters, and sometimes the people who save us are the ones we end.